Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to strip the old finish off of a table. This is an Ercol table that we were demonstrating in a previous video where the finish really, there is one way you could go about it. You have to strip the original finish off of it. The wax or wax polishing will be of no use whatsoever. So if you click up there, there's a video that will show you all about why we are going through this process as opposed to wax polishing. I'm just going to lift it up so you can see this finish. It's been varnished and it's been French polished. It's been over French polished. It's all let go, as in what I mean let go is the varnish and the polish is just coming away. The original finish is coming away. There's only one thing to do in this circumstance, and that is to strip the finish back. And this could be something you could do at home very easily for such a small area as well, if you were to take it outside and strip it outside in the open air. Now let's get on with it. Let's start stripping. So what I've got here is some chemical stripper. This is a solvent based stripper. You probably won't be able to buy a solvent based stripper, but if you can get hold of it, great. Water based strippers is probably what you'll end up with. They're not as powerful, but as we are a professional restorers or restoration company, we can get hold of the solvent stripper. Now I'm going to apply this solvent stripper, as you can see here, directly to the surface with this cut off paintbrush. It's just a trimmed paintbrush, and you can see how I'm applying it to the surface. I'm not brushing it around, splashing it around. I'm just going to move the stripper over the surface so it coats all the areas. I'm going to be generous with it as well. I want this stripper to bite into the varnish and the French polish and all those finishes that are underneath it. I don't know, all sorts of things could have happened to this Ercol table in its life. But this stripper will remove it. One thing I forgot to do, which I will do now, I forgot to put on safety glasses. So I can see the stripper starting to work now. You can see this dull area here, and the old finish is bubbling up and lifting away from the elm. I'm going to keep on applying it. I can keep on applying the stripper until I really start to see the old finish lifting off the surface. See it starting to happen now. You can see it in front of the brush. You can see as I move the brush, the old finish is coming away. Okay, so we've been doing this now for a few minutes and really penetrated the surface with the stripper. It's lifted off all the old varnish, the old finish that's there. You can see clearly it's started to really work its magic. So now it's time to get rid of that. So I'm going to use, this is an old, well it's not old, it's a new one, a pasting tray, a roller tray, that's what I'm trying to say, that's a roller tray. And this is a wallpaper scrape. We tend to use cabinet scrapes in the workshop, but if you've got one of these at home, it's equally as good. Right, so it's just a case now, I'm just going to put the tray under the table here, and then I'm going to scrape in the direction of the grain. I don't want to scratch across the grain. Is pull all that old finish off. I'm not using much pressure at this point at all. I'm just removing the stripper and that old finish. There it is there. Okay. Now I've got some really coarse wire wool. This is grade 4. Not the fine, but really quite coarse, almost like cheese wire. So be careful when using this. Always wear gloves because you could potentially cut yourself. And I'm going to scrub the surface of the table, taking off the rest of the stripper and the stripper around the edges. See how it picks up all the stripper and the dirt. You can see how it picks up all the old finish, or the old dirt, the old finish, the stripper, everything. It picks up anything loose on that surface and really sort of cleanly strips it. You can see how it's gone dry now. And I'm going to repeat this process. I'm going to strip it again, do exactly the same thing, just to make sure I really have a nice clean surface. When I was taught to do this, I was taught to do it 3 times. So you strip it once, do the same process twice, and a 3rd time really scrub it and make sure that the surface is nice and clean. So this is some fresh coarse wire wool again. I'm going to do exactly the same process. This time I'm going to scrub the surface a little bit more with the wire wool, trying to pick up any last remnants of that finish. When I was an apprentice, my foreman, or the boss, who was teaching me the French polishing and furniture restoration, he said this was one of the most enjoyable processes of French polishing, was removing an old finish and revealing the wood underneath. I kind of get it. just teasing apart the wire wool to get some fresh wire wool. Okay, there we go. We've cleaned it back twice now. I don't think there's a need for a third time. It looks nice and clean. We're back to that original fresh elm there. You can still see the water staining and the marks there, little black areas. So we are going to have to sand the top of this table to get back to what it looked like originally. So there will be some sanding necessary. Also, we have a large scratch going across the surface here. You can see that. So I am going to sand this quite considerably. It doesn't matter, it's elm. It will take it, it's not a veneer, so be careful if you're doing this to a veneered surface. Make sure that you know what it is of a veneered surface before you start sanding vigorously, because you'll sand through the veneer into the chipboard or MDF, whatever underneath, and you're in trouble. But this is solid elm, so I can happily sand this surface. So there are a few water marks also on this top that haven't come out when we stripped. They're still there, I can still see them, and some of them have gone black. So they've reacted with the timber, so there's quite dark staining. So I'm going to attack this top with some sandpaper, some red garnet paper. This is 100 grit, so it's really quite coarse. I'm confidently going to sand this surface. Again, please check to make sure that you haven't got a veneered surface, because if you've got veneer, I wouldn't be attacking it with 100 grit sandpaper. But solid, absolutely fine. And if you've got a mechanical sander, great. Sand the surface. I'm going to go with the grain because this is quite coarse. I don't want to go across the grain, causing great big scratches, so I'm going to go with the grain all over the surface of this table. Let's see how we get on. What I thought I'd just mention actually is what I'm using here is a block of wood that's just been cut down to sort of suit my hand, and on it is a piece of carpet, old carpet, just glued to the face there, and it fits perfectly in my hand as a lovely little sanding block. Right, you saw me there sanding it with a sanding block and 100 grit sandpaper to speed things up. I'm going to use our industrial sander here. And for this one, I am going to wear a mask. I didn't earlier on because I wouldn't be able to talk to you. You wouldn't hear me. But for this purposes, I'm going to put a mask on. Goggles. This is 100 grit. That's a bit dusty. Right, so yes, you would do that outdoors. Obviously, in the workshop here, we'd actually do it across the room with extractors. We've got two great big extraction rooms behind you. But for the purpose of the video, we've got to be doing it here, so I'm covered in dust. So this has now been sanded quite hard with that lovely mechanical sander. Now I'm going to finish it off by hand with a sandpaper and a block again. I'm going to go over the 100 grit, then probably go down to 120, 180, and finishing on a 180 grit sandpaper. So that's the process we're going to do now, going with the grain, taking out any of the orbital sander marks. I forgot I had a mask on. So we'll take out any of those orbital sander marks with the sandpaper. So let's do that bit. Okay. Now we'll change, go for the 120. So it's the 120. And now the 180. Okay, I think we're nearly there. I'll say that again. Okay, I think we're nearly there. There's a lot of dust on here, so rather than blow it off or shake it off, I'm going to vacuum off all of this sawdust, this fine dust, including it off myself. So, let's do that first. Okay, so now we have a cleanly stripped solid elm tabletop, coffee tabletop. I'm now going to neutralise the surface with some methylated spirits and a little bit of acetic acid, which is pickling vinegar. It's about 10% pickling vinegar or acetic acid in here, just to try and neutralise the solvent solution that I use in that paint strip, which is an alkali solution. The ones you use at home in a domestic are probably water-based, so you can neutralise them with water or just wash the surface with water. But I'm going to use a little sponge and some methylated spirits. Look at the lovely colour of that elm coming through. This is how the table's going to look in a minute once we put some oil on it. We're going to treat it with a bit of oil and wax polish this. But look at that, that's all the natural colour of the elm. The majority of the scratches are gone. There are still signs of dings and dents and marks, but that's part of its history, part of its life. I'm not going to sand everything away. There's a sign of that little scratch there, little dark areas. You could carry on, but I don't think it's necessary. The transformation is quite incredible. And the reason we use methylated spirits and not white spirit, we don't want white spirit going into the table surface at this point. It might affect the finish you're going to put on there, and it will be slow to dry. Whereas the methylated spirits, with a little bit of vinegar in there, and it evaporates away. Again, I should be wearing a mask, but you can't really hear me when I'm wearing a mask, and we're well ventilated here. So, there we go. Look at that. So I'm just going to leave that to dry, let all those methylated spirits and the acetic acid do its thing, let it dry for a few minutes, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to give it another light sand with some 180 grit sandpaper again. It's 180 pound sandpaper, and then we're going to oil finish it and wax polish it. But we're going to let that dry first, so we're going to wait a good few hours. If you can, leave it overnight and do it the next day. That's it. Okay, so we have let that dry for a good number of hours now. You would do it overnight at home. It's been drying quite nicely. You can hear it's dry. It's raised the grain slightly. So I'm going to cut back that raised grain and sand it with 180 sandpaper. So what we're going to do. now we have a lovely finish, our lovely raw timber here that's prepared, ready for finishing. One point I must make was why we neutralise after sanding and not before sanding, because if you were to put a neutralising solution onto the surface straight after you use the wire wool, especially when you're using on oak, you can get a reaction with the wire wool and the methylated spirits and the timber beneath, and it burns. It leaves little black marks, little iron oxide marks from the wire wool. So I always neutralise after I've sanded. So you initially sand, then neutralise, leave it, then sand again, and you've got a lovely prepared surface here, ready now for finishing. Now this is Ercol in its natural state. I'm not going to stain it, but you could stain this. We could apply a stain to colour this down, so there are darker colours in the Ercol range, or if you're not doing an Ercol table necessarily, it could be anything, but this is the point at which we would start thinking about doing the staining. So in the French polishing, what we would do would be to stain, then grain fill. I'm not going to do any of that. We're going to go straight on top with an oil, a hard wax oil. It's I think this is a Tretex one. You can get Osmo oil. This is it here. I've diluted it slightly. I'm going to brush apply this satin finished one coat very thinly, and then we're going to let that dry and wax it. So here it is. So I'm just going to brush apply this wax oil. Now you could use any amount of sealer. You don't have to have a hard oil like this. It's like a floor oil. You can have sanding sealer, shellac, varnish, anything you've got in your cupboards really. Just dilute it down slightly to start with so it gets good penetration into the surface. I like using this hard wax oil because it's got lots of natural oils in it. It dries bullet hard, enhances the wood, and gives a lovely natural finish. So we've left our table overnight to dry. You can see now this lovely natural finish that this very sort of a weak mix of oil, this hard wax oil that we used, it's just sort of diluted, it's penetrated into the elm, it's gone to a matte finish, it looks very natural, but it's really important to sort of do that, I think, rather than just waxing straight wax on there, because this will give us a much better layer of protection and a nicer natural finish. So what I'm going to do now is lightly sand the surface. You can hear it's just a little bit raised in the grain, little bits in it from where we sealed it with oil. This is 320 grit sandpaper, foam backed. It's got maybe a little bit too much of an edge, so actually what I'm going to do I'm just going to rub the face of it together. And what that does is just knocks off a bit of that biting edge to the sandpaper. I don't want to sand this flat. All I'm doing is just taking the little nibs off. So that has really made it into something, I suppose, around a 400 grit really, or maybe a bit more. So it's nice and smooth. So again, with the block, with the grain, I'm going to start over on this side of the table, work my way across very lightly. Now I'm just going to do the edges. I'm letting my fingers just follow the profile of the wood with the grain. Very light pressure. Not trying to sand it flat. Lovely and smooth. Now I'm going to take a little bit of soft 4-0 wire wool. Again, we use this in the workshop all the time. We use so much of this stuff, it's brilliant. I'm just going to go over the surface and just flatten it that little bit more. Now again, you probably could use a mask to do this. It's a natural finish, it's not too bad, but if I put one on, you won't be able to hear me very well. Right, okay. And that's it. What I'm looking for here is to see a nice matte, flat finish. There's no shiny areas, no uneven areas. We've been very careful. I lift it up there, you can see maybe. There's a layer of dust on it. I'm not cutting hard into the surface. It's a light De-Nib. That's all it was. It's just taking off the tops of the little ridges on the surface. I'm going to vacuum this off and then we'll wax it. Right, nice clean surface. I'm going to use our pure gold. I don't want to add any colour into it really. You could use rose gold on here. You could use antique gold. It will just put a little bit of colour into it. It's not going to stain the surface. We're not looking at changing the colour by using wax. We're using wax in this circumstance to create a nice finish, and I'm going to use the pure because we've got this lovely natural colour of this elm coming through. So I'm just charging the wire wool with the wax, pushing it into the wire wool. I'll start at this end of the table and work my way down. Again, with the grain, just dab it on a little bit to start with, just to evenly distribute the wax. Just going over it just to make sure it's nicely evenly spread out on the surface. Right, we're done. So we're going to leave that now for 20 minutes, half an hour, come back and we'll buff, and hopefully we'll see a nice soft satin natural looking sheen to this beautiful table. So as you can see there, it's all gone matte. As it starts to dry, the pure turpentine evaporates and all those waxes start to harden. Okay, so we've waited 20 minutes, or actually half an hour now. The wax has dried, the pure turpentine has evaporated or partly gone into the finish. Now we're ready to buff. So we're expecting a nice sort of satin finish here. Using our pure cotton buffing cloth, we've been using this for decades. And the reason it's so good is because it's got this lovely open weave to the cotton cloth that keeps the surface cool or cooler when we're using it for wax polishing, for buffing. So we buff the surface, it stops it from heating up and remelting the wax and smears. So that's why we use this lovely cotton cloth. Right, let's buff. Look at that. So it's doing exactly what I'd hoped it would do. It's just giving a lovely, soft, satin sort of natural sheen to this finish. And the combination of the oil and the wax together give you a nice, durable surface, but natural looking. I don't know how much of that will come up on the camera, but I buffed to about sort of there, it's satin, and then it's still quite matte when I haven't buffed it. There we go. So the top is now finished. A satin natural finish. Now all there is to do is to revive the base. So I'll clean and revive the base as well. I'm not going to strip and repolish. I'm just going to gently clean back with a bit of soft wire wool, clean off, and then a little fad of French polish and a wax finish as well. So a fad of shellac just to revive the base so it all ties in. But yeah, there's a lovely natural looking Ercol table. To find out some more about what we do, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you click the subscription button just down here, and also the little bell icon which is just beside it, if you click that, that'll notify you when we upload new videos. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.